You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Wednesday, December 11th. We just found out Bill Belichick going to be the head coach of North Carolina. So, I mean, this is a week for anything to happen, and it'd be a great week for that to mean the 49ers can beat the Rams on Thursday Night Football at home. Joining me to talk about this matchup and, of course, some injuries before we get started here, KP. And then we'll have Dezi here in a bit. But KP, how you doing?
Does that mean Belichick's not going to be hired as a 49ers defensive coordinator next year?
Oh, man. Man, that's too bad.
Just missed it. I'm good. It was nice to see the 49ers look like the 49ers for once last week. And, you know, hopefully they can keep it moving because there's a lot to build on off last week.
There definitely is. We're going to bring Dezi in here right now to talk about the 49ers injuries because, as always, there's never a shortage of injuries to talk about with this 49ers team. Dezi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. You just broke that news. I've been trying to watch the Belichick news like minute by minute because I'm a big Tar Heel fan. I went to school in Carolina, so I was like, what? So I've been eyeing that story very, very closely. So let's go. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you feel great about that news. That's really awesome. But in regards to this matchup, Thursday Night Football for the 49ers, they're getting some guys back, but other guys are going to be out. So as for the players that are going to be out, Trent Williams, he remains out. Ben Barch, as we know, he'll probably end up on IR by the end of the week. And Malik Mustafa, that was the one that was kind of a surprise because Malik Mustafa had that chest injury in the Bears game, but it looked like he was returning. He was like in and out, right, of that game. So I was a little surprised that he would be out for this game. We also have Nick Bosa questionable, Dre Greenlaw questionable, Isaac Guerendo questionable. That's a big one, Isaac Guerendo, because he hasn't really practiced this week. I think today he was limited, if I'm not mistaken, in the walkthrough. So we'll see if that means he could play. But Dezi, like as far as these questionable players, Greenlaw we haven't seen all season, right? So with this Achilles, he's coming back from a really serious injury. What could we expect from Greenlaw in his first game back from this?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just the energy that he brings. So whether he gets a lot of action on the field or off the field, just mentally, this team needs Dre. Like they need that big Dre energy in the worst and best way, right? We might not see a lot of action from him on the field. We'll have to see. I mean, we're 10 months out now from his Achilles tendon repair. So, but again, just the value of a player like that on the field, just from an energy and teammate perspective, it is priceless. So I am going to be looking closely at watching him return. You guys know, like I have been waiting for months for him to come back. So I want him to come back. I want to make sure that we are 100% sure he's ready to be back. We're in a situation. This is the only thing that makes me nervous. You're hearing now after the win over the Bears that the mentality is we have to win every game, right? They have this playoff mentality already. So I don't want them to get caught up in bringing him back a little before he's supposed to with this pressure of needing to win. So I don't think they'll do that. It is a devastating injury to have. So I think they would be cautious, but that's the only thing that keeps me a little nervous.
Yeah, and that's fair. And as of now, I don't think we've heard anything about what his workload may be. You know, Invader 49er here in the comments thinks he'll play every snap. We don't know. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what that looks like. There may be reports about that, a couple hours before the game. But as far as Nick Bosa, we haven't seen him for a couple of weeks. So it'll definitely be nice to get him back for this defense. Now, he was dealing with the hip and oblique injury. So I think they kind of wanted to take the cautious route and just rest him as much as possible so that he can come back 100%. Is that kind of your expectation as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hip, what I finally kind of heard, I didn't verify it, was that it was more of an adductor injury. So it wasn't like a hip pointer. It was like a strain of the adductor, which that's the muscles that are on the inside of your thighs. And so, that thing, I mean, I think that's pretty, I think it's reasonable that he's coming back. The timeline is reasonable for that injury. The one that I'm still questionable about is the oblique, right? Because oblique injury, was it just a strain, or again, is this more like a sports hernia that he's working through? We've seen, a couple of our players last year had those and had those repaired in the off season. So that's the big thing, just seeing. We'd love to have the big bear back though, right? We get Dre, we get Bosa. I mean, let's go. This is like the right time of year for this to be coming together. And so I'm here for it, especially since we're coming off this. It's a short week with a Thursday turnaround. Let's get some fresh players up and see if we can get this ball continuing to go in the right direction.
As far as Isaac Guerrero, so he suffered the foot sprain late in the game Sunday against the Bears. You kind of saw him limping. He had to head to the locker room and all that. I think one of the beat writers mentioned that he was not limping in practice, I believe yesterday. So that seems to be good news, right? What could we expect from a foot sprain, albeit we don't know the severity of it, right? But is there a big risk for re-aggravation theoretically if he does end up playing?
I think yes. I think that these are athletes that are playing banged up, right? Week by week. I don't think there's any reason why he really couldn't be taped up real good, expected to be in there. Maybe he's got even like a sleeve on his foot, an ankle area, load him up with some anti-inflammatories and get him out on the field. I think we're so limited in the running back core group that we kind of have to put him out there to some degree. So I would expect him to be out there. Again, I wouldn't think he's, maybe 50%. I don't know. We'll see. But I do think that he'll play. That's my gut.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of seeming to be trending that way, so we'll wait and see. And yeah, we got some fans of your background, Dezi. Everyone's got the dope backgrounds today. I didn't get the memo, so yeah.
I wish this was my big houses, guys. You're disappointed. I'm actually in my kids' game room. It is not that exciting. I promise you, it's more of like putting something up so I'm not embarrassed by what is my surroundings at the current moment. I'm not KP out here balling with this beautiful, background.
Dezi, I think Greenlaw just being in uniform, being on the field is the shot in the arm that this team needs. And I thought last week Deommodore Lenoir coming back was big just because you can feel the energy. It was palpable. And I think tomorrow night is going to be tenfold, right? This has been one of their best players for the past couple of years. Think about how devastated they were when he went off the field, and think about how everybody ever talks about him from the front office to the backup. So I think he's one of the most beloved players on the team. And even if Greenlaw plays 10 to 15 snaps, that'll what that does for the psyche of a team will be incredible. And I don't think you can really quantify that. And I also thought it was pretty telling that Guerrero after the game didn't have a boot on. So him being listed as questionable isn't too surprising. So I think he's going to be pretty effective, right? He's not going to play on a short week on a 72-hour turnaround if he wasn't capable of playing. But if they didn't have Guerrero, I would be very worried. So to have him in the fold, to have Greenlaw in the fold, to have Nicholas Bosa in the fold is going to be pretty big for the 49ers, no doubt.
Listen, you gave me chills right now. I just hearing you talk about Dre coming back, gosh, that's good. Imagine he comes out and the first defensive drive, he's out there and he clotheslines somebody. I'm just going to lose my mind. It's going to be amazing. I think I'm going to wear an arm sleeve just for Dre Greenlaw, just for his return.
Oh, I love that. Need it. I legit would put him on the kickoff team and just say, hey, run down and hit anybody in the opposite color jersey. And that would set the tone, honestly.
Against the Rams? Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, home game too. Crowd's going to be going wild when Greenlaw steps onto the field. It's going to be electric. So that's going to be big for this team for sure. I do feel like a lot of these injury statuses are make or break, right? As far as the questionable players we're talking about, Nick Bosa, Greenlaw, and Guerrero, the game can swing either way based on those and if those guys play. So let's just hope they're on the favorable side of that and they will suit up. But Dezi, man, thank you so much. This is an exciting one. Thursday night football, prime time at home. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about those injuries.
All right. Thanks, guys. I'm going to go play piano now in my big house.
Yeah, you go do that. Light the fireplace. Right. Oh man. Now, KP, what I do want to ask you about before we get into the Rams injuries, right? Mustafa is a big one to lose. So Hufanga coming back, as you mentioned, is big for this team, and you could see the communication was better. They just looked way more cohesive. I don't think that was any coincidence, right? So do you think that Jair Brown, obviously slated to start in this game with Mustafa out, do you think him playing next to Hufanga could help his play at all?
It is. And I still don't think he's like bad. I think he's getting, too much negative talk. But yes, he did give up a touchdown last game, but that was a really bang play. Like he had to make a split decision, a snap decision in like a half a second. So I really don't fault him too much for that. The biggest difference between Jair and Malik would be the open field tackling. So the Rams rely a lot on these quick screen passes. And if you watch Mustafa, he is like rock solid in the open field. And he not only brings you down, but he makes you go the opposite direction. So like that is a big loss in that sense. And one of the big plays, or one of the main plays that the Rams used last week against the Bills, was just throw it to Puka Nacua right away, a screen, and he gets 6 or 7 yards. And he's really good at making you miss or falling forward. So that's what I would worry about. Brown is taking on blockers and then beating the block, getting off the block, and making the open field tackle. All of these things Malik was phenomenal at. But at the same time, you can put Talanoa Hufanga at the line of scrimmage. And what we saw last week is him being so willing to take on 300 tight end, like just these bigger bodies than him. So I'm sure there's ways to, quote unquote, hide Jair Brown. But I think that's a good point. We're just like, hey, feed off, listen to the guys who've been there, right? Listen to Hufanga, listen to Warner. Like they will tell you where to be. They will let you know what's coming. But in the same sense, I also think Brown is a very good when it comes to like studying and knowing what's coming. So I wouldn't worry about him on the mental aspect.
In a way, there might be a little bit less on Brown's plate this time around, knowing that, Hufanga is back. So Hufanga will take care of the communication and all that on the back end, which alleviates some of Brown's plate. Now, Sean
by
Gibson,
the way, we're not talking about a player who's like hasn't played. He's started for a year straight now. And he's also seen the Rams before, which I think will go a long way.
Yeah, I do agree with that. If he does struggle, the 49ers do have Tashawn Gibson as well. They signed a few weeks ago. He hasn't played for them, I don't think, any snaps at all, maybe special teams. But in any case, do you sense that Brown would be on a short leash and Gibson could maybe get some run in this one?
I don't think so. I think if that's the direction you're going to go, just bring in another cornerback or rely on D Winters more as opposed to, whether it's Dre Greenlaw, whether it's Devondre Campbell. Just like Winters is very capable of running with anybody. I would trust Winters more than I would Tayshaun Gibson. I thought Gibson was signed strictly to cover kicks, like to be that veteran on special teams and not really defensively. But again, I think we're putting way too much on Brown. I don't think he's going to be a problem against the Rams.
I do hope you're right, KP. I do know the 49ers, like their defense is going to have their hands full, not just Brown, but like everyone across the board. So it is going to be really important for everyone to be on their P's and Q's. So let's get into the Rams injury status for this game. Couple guys who are out. Starting cornerback, Kobe Durant is going to be out for them. Tyler Higbee, who's missed, I think, all season to this point. He's going to remain out. Couple of guys who are questionable that I think somewhat notable. Alaric Jackson, their offensive lineman, dealing with a knee injury. Demarcus Robinson, their third wide receiver, he's also questionable. And also a couple of other depth pieces are questionable as well. But I think the big one here is Kobe Durant. And we were just talking before we went live here about who possibly could take his place. They still have Akella Witherspoon, and they just signed like a week or two ago, they brought in Emmanuel Forbes from the Commanders. So maybe it's Forbes, maybe it's Akella. I think you said they want to keep Witherspoon off the field, right? So maybe it's Forbes.
Yeah, you would think it would be Forbes, right? So they're playing down the stretch too. They're fighting for their playoff lives too, and they just signed a first-round cornerback who's obviously a cast-off from his previous team, but he practiced last week, and I would imagine they were gearing up for him to play against the 49ers. So I would imagine it's Ford. If it's not Ford and it is a Kello Witherspoon, then Kello expect many targets.
All right. And I'm just also seeing some people mention Iconoclast here says, just saw it's going to rain. Cancel all your celebration plans. When it rains, Brock pours. Ouch. So I've seen a couple people mention this possibility of it raining for Sunday night. I am looking right now on my tab here, the weather for Sunday, or sorry, I guess it's not Sunday, it's Thursday night. 55% chance of rain and 51% at night. According to weather.com, showers in the evening, then cloudy overnight. So this could be a wet game for Brock Purdy. That could change some things for the 49ers offense in this one.
Oh, undoubtedly. And that at the same time, it goes for the other side of the ball too. I don't know if anybody watched the Rams and the Bills last week because they were playing at the same time, but they made some miraculous connections between Stafford and Kupp or Stafford and Nakua. So if it's raining, the precision that makes the Rams offense go, like the timing, those passes, it's going to be very tough for them too. And they can't run the ball. So it probably favor the 49ers.
Hopefully the 49ers have Garendo available if it's going to be a run heavy game plan if it does in fact rain. But yeah, something to keep an eye on for this one. Again, it's Wednesday right now. Game is played in a little over 24 hours. So not much, I would imagine, would change in the forecast. So keep an eye on this in the next day. Now, to move on to some of these matchups for the 49ers, let's take a look at the Rams offense. I mean, we know this team pretty well at this point. I would say the biggest difference from week 3, which is the last time the 49ers played the Rams, is the Rams have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. I don't know. I feel like those guys are pretty important to the success of the Rams offense. And then also I'll throw out that a couple of their offensive linemen are back as well. I don't think they had Havenstein or like a few offensive linemen, if I'm not mistaken, were not available for that week 3 game. So now their entire offensive line is intact and back and healthy, as well as their 2 top wide receivers, and not just top receivers on the Rams, but they're in the top 10 of all receivers, I think, in the NFL. So this is going to be quite the challenge for the 49ers, I think.
Yeah, Nacua is amazing, man. I watch him and I don't know like how he gets open or what he does like well. When you look at it from the top receivers in the NFL, right? Like an AJ Brown or like the best of the best. And then there's Puka, who just always gets open. He always finds a way. He always makes a catch. He always gets 2 feet down when it seems impossible that he gets 2 feet down. Like a guy will be draped all over him and still doesn't matter with Kupp. I think he's clearly not the same Kupp. Like he's a shell of himself. And I was looking at some of his numbers and watching some of his targets. Like he's not even being targeted beyond 20 yards. Actually, 61 of his 91 targets this year have come underneath 10 yards, which I thought was pretty telling. You know, Sean McVay is going to target a player where he's at the best. And to me, that just tells me Kupp can't really run anymore. If I'm Nick Sorensen, I am putting all my resources in stopping Nacua. And if I lose to one of those miraculous Kupp games, then that's how I lose, right? If Deommodore Lenoir gives up 15 catches to Cooper Kupp, the player that I just signed to a massive extension, then I'm okay with that. But if it's just all these free access plays because I'm sitting back and playing zone, and that's how the Rams receivers eat me up, which is not what you want to do. That's what the Bills said last week, and that's how you gave up 40-plus points. There has to be different challenges. So I'm getting in the face. I'm trying to be physical, and I'm trying to rely on my athleticism to beat Puka and Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, I think, like I said, they're going to have their hands full, but there are ways to, I think, slow this offense down a little bit. And KP, you didn't mention Kyren Williams, but I do think that stopping him is kind of the key. And I'll say this, volume for Kyren Williams is the big thing, right? Yeah. He's second in rush attempts with 251 on the season. has resulted in 5th in rushing yards. He's just over 1,000. He's also 5th in rush yards after contact. So this would not be a good week for the 49ers to struggle with missed tackles or anything like that. 27.9% of his runs have resulted in a first down or a touchdown. So I think the first key is stopping Kyren Williams. And you see here just some games from this season. Last week against Buffalo, he had 31 total touches, 97 yards, 2 touchdowns. In week 3 against the 49ers, 26 touches, 116 yards, a hat trick, so he gets the ball a lot, and he has that capability of really making you pay for it if you're not careful. So among everything else that you have to worry about, you got to make sure Kyren Williams does not go under the radar.
Yeah, and I remember last game, week 3, I believe, it was out of the backfield in the red zone, and he just cooked Devondre Campbell. And they actually ran that same play against the Eagles, I believe it was, and he scored a touchdown on a similar route out of the backfield. So can't sleep on him as a receiver out of the backfield. You would think that's where Fred Warner comes into play, but the Rams do a good job of just isolating him on your worst linebacker, and that's where he, does most of his damage. So maybe that's where we see D. Winters come into play. Last week, in the second half at least, Winters started to play more and more over Devondre Campbell. Winters just looks more comfortable. He was way faster. He plays faster. I don't know what we'll get from Greenlaw, but I think having, especially on obvious passing downs, having whether it's Greenlaw, whether it's Winters in over Devondre Campbell will go a long way in slowing down these underneath routes, whether it's to the tight end or especially Kyren Williams. But that's a good point about being physical. Just you got to tackle. You got to bring these guys down. They've had some embarrassing moments at the point of attack this year, but I think overall the 49ers have been pretty solid and pretty consistent when it comes to tackling. There are just these crazy outlier games where there's like double-digit missed tackles, and it basically just tends to snowball.
Yeah, no pun intended, because it has happened in some bad weather games. So hopefully this one is not one of those. But yeah, I mean, Kyren Williams, the first guy to stop. The 49ers overall haven't been great against running backs. They've allowed 16 touchdowns to running back this season. That is the second most. I think the encouraging thing was that last week against DeAndre Swift, the Bears, had 21 touches, 54 yards. But I'll say, like, the Bears don't really do themselves any favors. So this is going to be different. I wouldn't get my hopes up too much or rely too much on that performance to assume that the 49ers are going to have a similar performance against Kyren Williams. But I do think, obviously, there is some room for them to limit him just a little bit in this game. I think tackling is going to be important to doing that. The other thing, I mean, we already talked about him, right? The Rams wide receivers. This is, like, to me, the most concerning thing of this matchup. And I think you mentioned it, like Puka Nacua especially. He's been looking like a top 3 receiver in the league since he's come back from injury. Last week against Buffalo, 14 targets, 12 catches, 162 yards, a touchdown. He also had a rushing touchdown in that game. And you mentioned it, like, Kupp has officially, like, now, I think it started even last season, I'd say, like, he's taken the back seat, right? So he had targets last week, 92 yards and a touchdown. And so you look at the target rates when they run routes, like 37% for Puka, 29.2% for Kupp. So yeah, I agree that I would allocate, like, all the resources to stopping Puka as much as possible. And you could do everything right, and he could still make a ridiculous catch, like the one he made last week, that tiptoe catch that he made on the sideline. But even still, at least you did everything you could to try to slow down one of the league's best.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you replay some of those catches, if you hey, we're going to run the same route, we're going to play that over again, we're going to simulate this 10 times, it probably goes in the Bills' direction 9 out of 10 times. Like, they just, like, and I'm not taking away from him, like, he made some incredible plays, but it doesn't feel sustainable. And I think when you just kind of look back through the past month of, like, how the Rams have been moving the ball and, like, where they've struggled, I thought last week was such a big outlier that it makes me believe the 49ers are going to do surprisingly well, I guess. Just the vibe on this game feels like everybody's convinced the Rams are going to score 40 again. But if you just kind of look at the past couple of weeks, when they play like a solid to average pass defense, they don't really do anything. They usually, a lot of the Rams stats, just like in week 3, come in the fourth quarter when the game's seemingly decided. Obviously, they came back in week 3 against the Saints. They did a lot of their damage in the fourth quarter, but they didn't really do anything in the first half. It was the same like that in the Eagles. They had one good drive in the second drive of the game against Philadelphia. And then after that, they had 3 consecutive 3-and-outs. So McVay is always going to have a good opening script, the first couple scripts, but after that wears off, you can only play up to your talent so much. And I think at the end of the day, the 49ers are so much more talented. And even when looking at the screen right now with Kupp and Nacua, this is why you draft Renardo Green in the second round, to get in people's faces and challenge him. This is why you pay Charvarius Ward. This is why you pay Deommler and Lore, because you're better and you're in the secondary. You need these physical guys, and you need to be able to match these upper echelon receivers. And I think the 49ers actually match up surprisingly well and a lot better than most teams will.
So I was looking at this stat, right? Like Kupp, since he's come back, or in this season, actually, he has played 68% of his snaps in the slot. He's a slot receiver for the most part. We know Lenore mans a slot. Now, do you think like this could be a game where we were just talking about, right? Like we should allocate everything to stopping Puka. Should the 49ers not have Lenore in the slot if Kupp's going to be there and just have him follow Puka in this one?
Yeah, it's tough just because they line up all over the place, right? Like it can be 3 different plays on one drive and Nacua can line up in 3 different spots. So it's going to be tough to travel in that sense. So I think if I'm, Nick Sorensen, I'm just saying, hey, like whichever one's in the slot you're going to take. If they're both on the same side, we probably want Lenore on Nacua. They can both be in the slot at the same time too. So that's going to be a little tricky. I just hope that like what I really don't want to see is 10 plays in a row where the 49ers just sitting back in zone coverage, right? And they're rushing 4 and they're hoping to confuse Matthew Stafford, and he picks them apart because he picks everybody apart when they sit back and play zone. Like you have to be aggressive in this sense. I think you have to be the attacker. So whoever it is, whether it's Lenore, whether it's Renardo Green, whether it's Mooney Ward, I think it's actually a pretty good idea to be more aggressive with Mooney, especially now that he's back in the fold, now that he has a game under his belt. I would probably travel him anytime Puka's on the outside. Maybe that's what they do. They have like little packages where he goes to one side. He's always on the same side as Puka, and then Lenore can be in the slot. If he's in the slot, if he's on the outside, then Mooney can match up with him. But Renardo Green, take the other guy, right? Like if DeMarcus Robinson is the guy who beats us, then that's the guy who beats us, tip of a cap. But I just don't see a world where that happens. Like Green's been very, very good this year. And I think Lenore and Mooney have been equally as good. So usually the players that get over on the 49ers are like these big, fast, speedy wideouts. And that's just not who Kupp and Nacua is, who they are. But at the same time, like we don't have any examples of the 49ers playing both of these receivers in the same game at the same time. So like I honestly don't know what to expect.
Yeah, I just know it is a lot, right? Because
they're very good. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 really good receivers. That's really hard to stop. It's enough for just like one really good receiver. But yeah, 2 of them is a lot. Matthew Stafford, of course, is on my not so favorable matchup because all the reasons we just mentioned. And since Puka and Kupp have been back, Stafford has just taken his game to another level, the level that we know he could be, right? 5th in passing yards this season, 6th in play action rate as well. So that's another thing that goes back to like, you got to stop the run as well, or at least limit it as much as possible. You can help limit the play action and the success that the Rams could have from that. I will say in week 3, the 49ers did a pretty good job of limiting Matthew Stafford, right? As you said, it wasn't until the very end in that game where the whole team just decided to collapse that the Stafford got some things going, but his stat line is 16 of 25, 221 yards, 8.8 yards per attempt, the touchdown. So they did fine limiting Stafford. Of course, that was without Puka and that was without Kupp, right? You see the difference now, like last week against Buffalo, good defense, right? 23 of 30, 320 yards, 10.7 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns. And the touchdown rate has gone up to 5th in the league, 6.6% since Puka and Cup have returned. So these guys do make a big difference for Matthew Stafford. So that's where I'm a little cautious about Stafford getting loose, getting very comfortable in this game.
And this is where the defensive line has to come to play, right? This is where the Nick Bosa boost has to come. This is where like having Gross Matos, who didn't play in week 3, should be a big benefit for the 49ers. I think the world of Stafford. I think he's one of the best, probably one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. Like he always finds a way. He always makes these ridiculous throws. But the Rams offensive line, whenever they play a group of athletes, like they really struggle. Week 3, you said that 46% of his dropbacks, that was the highest pressure rate that they've allowed all season. And I know they weren't healthy, but we have plenty of examples over the past 3 or 4 years when the Rams play the 49ers defensive line, no matter who's out there, no matter which free agent they sign, like they always tend to win. And I think that's going to be a lot of the same this time around. So you have Bosa, you have Sam O, you have Leonard Floyd, you have Gross Matos. I think this might be the first time we see all season all 4 of those guys on the field at the same time. So that would go a long way. Miami, the Dolphins are not thought of as this big pressure team, but they have athletes and they were able to generate pressure against the Rams. Philadelphia a couple weeks ago, they had 12 pressures and 5 sacks. In that Dolphins game, they held the Rams to 15 points. They had 15 pressures on 4 sacks. Obviously, the Bills never got home because they don't have athletes like the other teams I mentioned do. So I think it's actually a really good spot for the 49ers to pressure Stafford. And there's a picture of him running right now, but we know like he's not terribly mobile. Like he's good at extending plays beyond the pocket. Like he's good at just not getting sacked right away, but if you just get in his line of vision, his face, essentially, I think the 49ers are in a good spot here. So I think as much as we're talking about, Stafford, Kupp, Nakua, I think this is a time where we see like the best version of the 49ers defensive line, and that will in turn reflect the scoreboard and, punts.
Yeah, and the 49ers have had success, like pressuring Stafford and that pressure turning into less production for him, right? In 7 games since being the Rams starting quarterback against San Francisco, he has 6.5 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And, we mentioned it in the last 7 meetings, 37% of the time he's been pressured by San Francisco. So again, like they have a good formula that I think has worked for them. So I don't see a reason why they would stray away from that now. And like we said, with the boost of Bosa, Greenlaw coming back, like that could be something big for this game, even with the dangers of Puka and Kupp that we mentioned. It all starts with putting pressure on Matthew Stafford. So yeah, I do kind of like this here. Now, we have a lot of slides, so let's move through here to the second half here. Rams defense. All right, we already talked about the fact that their corner Kobe Durant is going to be out for this game. We think it's going to be Emmanuel Forbes who will be starting in his place over Witherspoon. The big thing I want to talk about here, KP, is the Rams defensive line and how they've improved throughout the season. Most of it being Jared Verse, dude. Like he's incredible. I think he's in front of being rookie defensive rookie of the year, right? For how he's looked. Braden Fisk has also been a good complementary piece with those guys next to each other. Like their defensive line, I really respect and I really like what they've done with it. Just investing in that line the last couple of drafts, I think has paid off for them. So this could be a challenge for the 49ers offensive line, but they've been okay with it so far, I'd say.
It's definitely a challenge for Jalen Moore and Colton McKivitz in the sense that like Verse and Byron Young, that they're power rushers. So like they can get into your chest and they can walk you back. I actually think Jalen Moore one-on-one in pass pro, he's been really good. He's been surprisingly good. He looks like, oh, why isn't this player starting? Obviously Trent Williams is in front of him, but we can do a whole podcast on why he's not starting at right tackle. Anyway, I just think that like this will be the first time he goes against like a capable power rusher. So I could see the 49ers really getting the ball, going out of their way to get the ball out of Purdy's hands quickly and then eventually dialing up plays. But I think the best way to really slow down the Rams pass rush is just to sustain drives, right? Whether that's, run here, pass here, screen here, whatever it may be. But really go on these 8, 9, 10 play drives to wear them down. Because honestly, like outside of Verse, outside of Fisk, who again are very good players, this unit stinks. Like they're not very good, and they are below average in a lot of categories. There's last time the 49ers played them, they scored on their first 2 drives, and the only reason they didn't score on another drive in the first half was because that McKivitz sack and Purdy fumbled, so they weren't able to add a field goal late. But I think we're going to see a very aggressive version of Shanahan. Shanahan honestly might have called one of his best games last week. So now he goes into a game on a short week with a quarterback who is healthy, which does matter. I think that had a lot to do with what we saw last week as well. And he figured out who, he always knew this, but he stopped messing around and just got the ball to his best players. And I think this week will be exactly what the doctor ordered as far as Juwan Jennings goes. So in the first matchup, it's not really being talked about that Jennings had 1 billion yards in the first matchup. Right?
And 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, like he was a killer. And I don't think that's going to change. Last week, the Bills, they used Mac Hollins in the slot one time for an explosive play. He had a 21-yard reception. What's his name? The other guy, Khalil Shakir. He had another one. He had 4 targets, I believe, in the slot. And I think he had over 60 yards. And last week was the first time in a long time that the 49ers got back to getting Juwan Jennings the ball in the slot. He caught all 5 of his targets. I think he had he had 6 targets for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the first time they played the Rams, he caught all 5 of his targets. So like Kyle's kind of setting the table for what we're going to see, I think. And they used Juwan Jennings on a double move. They used him on a little trick play, but that's how you get your best player the ball, right? That's how you get him involved. So I think we're going to see another heavy dose of Juwan Jennings. And I think it's a really good opportunity to get Deebo Samuel involved too. But never hurts to get that guy involved on the screen either.
George Kittle. I almost feel bad because I don't have a slide for Juwan Jennings. But I think like at this point, I just know that he has such a high floor with this offense. He's going to get targets. He's going to have a role in pretty much every game. George Kittle, though, I do think, look, we saw last week, if you feed him the ball, like he is going to eat. Okay. So 6 catches, 151 yards. That was with, I think, a concerted effort to get him involved after the comments he had made the week prior, right? We kind of predicted it. Like we thought that would happen. So I would expect him to stay involved in this game. Of course, Juwan Jennings, I think, will also stay involved in this one. And a guy who can, maybe stand to get involved is Deebo Samuel, as you mentioned, the squeaky wheel this week. Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy, of course, were asked about Deebo's comments when they, spoke to the media this week. And they both kind of said like, hey, yeah, like we could give him the ball more. And he's not struggling. So I think what that means is more targets for Deebo this week. So it seems like unlikely, I guess, or it seems like the opposite of what I should do, just looking at Deebo's stats this season. But I can't ignore that. I just think that they're going to feed him this week.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Deebo and I saw how that worked out for Kittle last week, I would be very vocal about wanting the ball too, because it worked. And again, I think about it, just like historically, he eats the Rams alive. And I think it's also important to point out that Deebo didn't play in the first matchup, right? So we don't have a data point of how he performs against the Rams this year, but we have plenty of data points about how Deebo has done in the previous 9 games. I think he has 7 touchdowns as well. Yeah, 7 touchdowns right there. Is this with Isaac Guerrero banged up with a foot sprain? Do we see more Deebo in the backfield? Do we see more Deebo on screen passes like they do with Puka on the other side of the ball? I'd be curious if that's the way to just get him involved early. Obviously, there are ways to get him involved in trick plays, what the 49ers have done, but I just don't think they're going to go I don't think Shanahan's going to shy away from getting Deebo the ball. Now, I guess the dangers of that would be, how do you get him the ball, right? You're not going to rely on him beating man-to-man coverage because that's not his strength. That's why you have Kittle. That's why you have George Kittle. But at the same time, like he's still a very valuable player to this offense. And I think teams, they're not showing him the same respect. So this might be a great time for the 49ers to kind of buy low, right? To get him involved early against a secondary who hasn't been able to guard literally anybody. Like it's insane how bad they are across the board. So like using DVOA, the Rams are 17th at defending wide receiver ones, 21st at receiving wide receiver twos, 31st at defending the slot. So like no matter who they're guarding, they struggle to do it. And that goes down the line. And a lot of those numbers would be a lot worse, but teams don't have to throw the ball on them because they can run the ball on them. So it's kind of pick your poison in the sense of who you want to take away for the 49ers, even without Brandon Ayuk, without Christian McCaffrey. So I am pretty fascinated to see how Shanahan reacts to Debo's comments from a play calling standpoint and getting him involved.
Yeah, I do think we see more Debo even if Guerrero plays, right? And we probably see Samuel in the backfield even if he plays. So, yeah, I do think they're just going to try to feed him, put him in more favorable spots. Like the way they used Kittle last week were things that were different that they hadn't really done too much of before. And for the love of God, can people like hold a block for Debo so he can actually like get going? He had every right to throw some guys under the bus about blocking. Instead, he said he wasn't getting the ball, which is simply not true. He is getting the ball. But hopefully guys could block just a little bit better to make some way for Debo in this game, and they could have success. Now, the final one, I know you got to get out of here, KP. The final one here for favorable, Brock Purdy. And I'll preface that by saying that I did not know it was going to be raining when I had him as a favorable. I'd probably knock him down just a peg, but I do still think the matchup is good for Brock to have success in this game. The Rams rank 31st in yards per attempt allowed this season, 30th in touchdown rate allowed in week 3 against the Rams. Brock Purdy was none of the 49ers issues. Like he was 22 of 30, 292 yards, 3 touchdowns. Mind you, that was with no Kittle or Debo on the field. Last week was also a great performance from him. 80% completion percentage, 325 yards, 13 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns. So if Kyle Shanahan and Brock are kind of on that same page and that same groove where they're doing a lot of the things that makes this team click, like the easy button, that they pressed the easy button for Brock last week. And I hope that continues in this game against the Rams. I think they'll have success. I'll also note like the Rams run a lot of zone, right? So yeah, that plays into Purdy's strengths and Debo's, who we were just talking about. So I think that could be a good matchup for him.
Yeah, definitely. And part of the reason when I think of Debo in the backfield, I think of using him as a receiver out of the backfield, right? So you get him matched up against a linebacker. But like just speaking of Brock Purdy, I thought one of the reasons I thought Shanahan's game plan was so good last week is because like he leaned into what Brock does well. And that's really, get him on the move a little bit. Don't move his launching point, like move where he's throwing the ball from. So like, yes, he's very good in the quick game, but like once he gets on the move and rolls out, he's looking to let it fly. He's looking to sling it down the field. And that's exactly what he did. So like when he can be that kind of aggressive player, I think he just really settles in. And that's when his accuracy is at his best too. So hopefully that doesn't change this week. Like if you're going to throw the ball 25 times like you did last week, let him be aggressive and sling it down the field and throw it down the field and give Juwan Jennings an opportunity to make plays and give George Kittle an opportunity to make plays. I love the idea of using Guerrero out of the backfield, down the field. So like that was a nice change of pace that we really haven't seen from the 49ers this year. So hopefully Guerrero's still healthy and they can use that. But I also think there's a couple opportunities for Ricky Pearsall to get involved too, because of, the not so favorable secondary that the Rams have. So I wouldn't be surprised if we finally see some Ricky Pearsall involved, and that could be down the field because like they haven't been on the same page, and they've talked about it a little bit, but there have been probably 3 or 4 opportunities in the past month or so where like Pearsall has been this close, and then they hit one against the Bucks. So it's not like they're shying away from it. They just haven't been on the same page. And if there's any team to do it against, it's definitely the Rams. So I agree. I think Purdy's in for a big afternoon. If you have a sports book, you definitely want to take his over yards. Took that. So I think he's gonna cook. I think he's definitely gonna do well against the Rams.
So you're not as concerned about the rain in this case?
I'm really not. I think we're going to see some hot potato early on where he's just getting the ball out quick as the 49ers get used to like what the Rams pass rush can and can't do. And then once they get settled in, like, is it going to be a downpour? Is it going to be like torrential downpour? Like, what are we expecting here? I don't think that's going to be the case. It might just be drizzle. So I don't know. I don't know how to answer that because I wasn't expecting, I wasn't aware that there was going to be precipitation either. So my initial read was like, no. So like they'll be fine and they'll be able to throw it all over the place. But obviously that would change if, it only rains when the 49ers have the ball.
All right, last question before I get you out of here. Have you thought of a score prediction for this one? Your score prediction for last week really wasn't that bad, like in hindsight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another situation where they roll. I think the offense, what we saw last week was the offense that we probably should have been seeing for most of the weeks, right? And Brandon Allen under center, Brock Purdy not having, games where he's fully healthy, like that matters in the latter portion of the season, but none of that is an issue right now. And there's nothing that I've seen from the Rams to make me think they'd be able to slow down the 49ers because any offense that they've played who's semi-competent has been able to do whatever they want against them. So I think the 49ers get north of 27 here, and I don't think the Rams score over 21. So I'll go 27-20.
That's
actually
ballsy.
I don't think it's going to be that close either. I legit would lean more towards the 49ers winning by double digits than the Rams keeping it within a field goal. I do not think it's a good matchup for the Rams. I think there's too much last week hindsight and people are ignoring how they looked against the Saints, how they looked against the Eagles, how they looked against the Dolphins. Like they haven't been that good over the past month, but because they scored 40 whatever it was against the Bills, because what we saw last time, people are under the impression that, the Rams are back, the Rams are this. But I think it's going to be a humbling experience. I think the things that we talked about, Dre Greenlaw being back in the fold, right? Like that energizing, that I don't think people can quantify that. So I really think it's a good spot for the 49ers. And, hopefully after this dub that they're able to get Trent Williams back because going to need him after this.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I'll give my prediction really quick. I do think it'll be closer. I do consider how many points the Rams put up against the Bills last week. That can't be ignored. So I'm actually going to go 31-28 Niners, and that's with the assumption that all the guys that are questionable, Bosa, Guerrero, and Greenlaw do play in this game. I think it will provide a significant boost for this team. But yeah, a lot of people predicting low score for the Rams. So, okay, I like it. I like it. All right, KP, thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone in the live chat, thank you so much. You guys kept it popping, dropping stats in there too. Appreciate it. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Audio listeners, make sure you leave a rating, leave a review. Helps us out. But for now, have a good rest of your Wednesday, folks. Enjoy the game tomorrow. Peace.